Build creative confidence. Beat the inspiration addiction. Join the Writer's Gym. Dr Kim Fleet's work in Indigenous land rights in Australia inspired her first two novels, Sacred Site and Featherfoot. She then turned to crime closer to home and wrote the series of novels Paternoster, Holy Blood and Devil's Chimney, set in Cheltenham and featuring feisty private investigator Eden Gray. Over 8 of her short stories have appeared in magazines in the UK and Australia, including People's Friend, Woman's Weekly, Take a Break, and That's Life Fast Fiction. She has won or been shortlisted in over 20 literary competitions, including the Asham Award. She's written 24 articles on social history, genealogy and well-being for magazines including Discover Your Ancestors, Family Tree magazine and Planet Mindful. She also wrote 2 monologues for the End of the Line podcast about women who choose not to have children. Kim has an MA and PhD in Anthropology and MAs in English Literature and Screenwriting. She enjoys gardening, patchwork, exploring old buildings and reading historical true crime, and you can find her on Instagram at Kim Fleet and Substack outbacktopaperback.substack.com. Kim, in our adventures as you're a member of the Writers' Gym, one of the things that I found out is that you changed the law in Australia, which hasn't made it to the bio.
Yes, it hasn't made it to the bio because it was very much a team effort. But yeah, I was working in native title land rights in Western Australia. My background's in anthropology, and I had a particular interest in national parks, and my boss sort of put me in charge of our organisation's work in national parks in the whole of the Yamadji and Pilbara areas, which was absolutely massive. And at the time, Indigenous people in Western Australia had no rights over national parks that were in their traditional country. So in places like the Northern Territory, they had lots of rights, and there were places like Uluru and Kakadu where they owned the land that was a national park. But in Western Australia, they had to pay park entry fees. If they wanted to enter the national park, they weren't allowed to camp there, take in dogs. They weren't allowed to hunt or collect medicines, all sorts of things that Indigenous people want to do on traditional country. And I didn't think that was right. And I started working very closely with the conservation people who ran the national parks to say, look, I think Indigenous people should be involved, and they have lots of things to say about the way the land is managed. And actually, you've got the same interests in common. And this ended up with me being part of a small group of people across Australia who wrote a white paper saying, look, this is how joint management, where Aboriginal people are really heavily involved in the managing and control of national parks, this is how it could happen in Western Australia. And we had a deadline, and time ticked on and time ticked on, and the person who was supposed to be writing it didn't do it. So I wrote the white paper that went to the minister to say, this is what we think should happen. And a long time afterwards, it became law.
How did you get from the white paper has gone into finding out it had become law?
I was Googling it. I was seeing whatever happened to that? Whatever happened to that? In the meantime, what I'd done, okay, so let's just kind of salami slices. And so I was working with local conservation agencies, and they were writing a new plan of management, and very kindly said, would you like to write the Aboriginal components? I was all right, okay, let's just write this as a joint management plan. So I'll just knock that one off. Yeah, I was very feisty in those days. I sort of really passionately believed in the work that I was doing. I was quite a troublemaker. The nicest compliment I've ever had in my entire life was when someone at the very top of a conservation agency in Australia said to me, if they'd known how much trouble you were going to cause, Kim, they never would have given you a visa. And I just think, yeah, great, job done.
Do you know, it's so interesting hearing you say that, because I haven't always been a fan of the word feisty for the reasons that we all know, that you never hear a male protagonist called feisty, but maybe there is a quality in it that does appeal, or that gets things done in a certain way in a certain situation. Is that what appeals to you about it?
A friend of mine has a phrase which is, sometimes you're playing with a straight bat, and I quite like that phrase, and it makes me think sometimes, okay, if you can't do it with a straight bat, can you do it in a devious way? And sometimes you can do things in a more roundabout way, and sometimes a slightly devious way.
Yeah, and it is has a lot of parallels for wider life as a freelance writer, what you're describing, doesn't it? Because you kept coming back, you saw what needed to be done, and you kept badgering.
Yeah, exactly. I think just sort of thinking about it in terms of writing, sometimes we wait for permission. And we wait for permission from somebody else. And actually what we need to do is give ourselves permission or create the opportunities for ourselves. And I can't achieve what I want to do this way. Okay, I'll try it another way.
It never ceases to make me both cringe and laugh at myself and most of humanity that we are 9 times out of 10 still waiting for an adult to do it, or think that if it were going to be done or deserved to be done, a proper adult would have done it.
Yeah, I don't think there's ever a point in your life when you realise that you're the grown-up. And those instances where sort of you do have that feeling of, oh, actually, I am the grown-up in this situation, I should know what to do, are always a little bit of a shock.
It's lovely hearing guests say that, because for every person who I invite and who does come to the Writers' Gym, there's a couple who've said they won't be a proper writer until they've done their next book, or until they've written in that genre, or until this, that and the other. And it's so human, but it's a sad thing at the same time that we can't do that imaginative jump, that actually we're already qualified. And I love reading a biography like yours, where I can absolutely see how the passions and the life experience have fed into the writing, and the writing has led into the passions and the life experience. We started by talking about Australia. Would you be up for taking us on a little tour of how life and fiction and non-fiction went for you?
Yeah, sure. How far back do you want me to go? Because I'm quite old.
Well, actually, now there is a separate argument again about the idea of adults. Yeah. Are we though? So I'll give you one example I heard the other day when we had Victoria Dowd, the crime writer here. She mentioned an early example of taking Agatha Christie off her parents' bookshelf and reading it and going, oh, and that was when the curiosity and the sense of wanting to be part of something maybe that was a moment. Did you have moments early on where the writer was sort of hearing the call?
For me, it's I blame my father for this. We were a very bookish family. So library books, a house full of books. We had a big house, and there were books in every single room. And I think there were books on the landing as well. We were that kind of family. And at 9, my dad gave me a copy of a book called How to Write a Novel. And it was aimed at children, but it was how to write your own novel. And I read this, and for the first time in my life, it dawned on me that all these books I loved reading were actually written by somebody. And so with the confidence of a 9-year-old, I thought, okay, well, that could be me. That'll be me. And so I wrote my first novel at 9, and it was fabulous. It was very heavily influenced by Enid Blyton, and it was about 3 children and their dog. I don't know what the dog had to do with anything, frankly. They find an old spell book and find a spell where they go back in time to the time of Elizabeth I and uncover a plot to assassinate Elizabeth I and put Mary Queen of Scots on the throne. And they have to thwart this plot and then find out how to get back to their own time. And it's got brilliant dialogue in it. It's like, good morning, Queen Elizabeth I. Have you had any breakfast yet? And it's just superb. But I think it has kind of established this is the kind of writer I am. I like writing dual timelines. I like things happening in the past, and I like what if questions.
Which are all such wonderful foundations, aren't they? Yeah, because I mean, we can giggle at what isn't there yet. Of course, we all giggle at previous selves for what isn't there. But you can see how much really is there of who you are now.
Yeah, and sometimes when I've sort of been writing things, or sometimes if I'm giving a talk about a book, then I'll think, yeah, that question about assassinating Elizabeth I and putting Mary Queen of Scots on the throne, I'm still exploring that question. But this idea of what's happened in the past and how it influences or is still going on in some way in the present is something that I just write about time and time again. And if I think about it now in terms of what I was doing in Australia, where I was working in land rights, what happened in the past is determining what happens now. Have people maintained their connection with their country? Can they prove that they've maintained that connection back to 1827. And that's sort of, well, on the basis of that, the government will decide whether or not they can do certain things on what is their traditional country. So this idea of the past is very, very alive in the present for me.
And that absolutely speaks to why being a historical novelist appeals to you. You've had a lot of success in short stories as well as novels.
Yeah.
Is the experience very different for you?
Yes. So I'd written a lot of commercial short stories for the women's short story magazines, and they're absolutely brilliant fun. And they have their own parameters to them. So I wrote dozens and dozens and dozens of short stories for the People's Friend magazine, which I know is not everybody's taste, but it really teaches you how to excavate a story. And you have such tight parameters that you can't write about this. And so you can't do any sort of domestic abuse, for example, or anything where an animal is hurt. You can't do that. You have to have a happy ending, but it can't be soppy. And this is really great training. I've got 2,000 words. Can I come up with a story that's original and fits these parameters and fits this magazine? And I found that really great training. And it was also wonderful because at the time I was writing crime stories, and my crime is really quite gritty. I think if you're going to kill someone, then don't make it cozy. That's a personal belief that it has to kind of affect people. And if you think, oh, well, so-and-so has been murdered, it doesn't feel right to me, sort of that the victim can be so easily cast aside. So when I write crime, if somebody is killed, then it's hard to read. But writing that kind of thing and researching ways to kill people and red herrings, etc., is very dark business. But the other side of that was, well, I can write a story for the People's Friend this week, and it can be about a girl who works in a garden centre, and and it can be it was very sort of light and joyful. And so I got those two sides, which I found really, really nourishing as a writer.
Can I ask about that experience of light and joyful? I'm hearing a lot of confidence building opportunity there, because although the subject matter has those parameters and tends towards the light and joyful too, potentially, you're also dealing with very strict structural work. Can you talk to me a bit about how you make that fun for yourself, and if you are much of a planner or if it stays in your head and comes out? How does that experience go for you?
The way I go about it is, so quite often a character comes to me, especially if it's a short story. I'm usually starting with a character who's then in search of a story. Novels somehow seem to start the other way round, that I sort of have a what if for a plot and then have to go and search for a character, and then in the developing of the character, the plot completely changes. But I used to find it quite fun sort of to start with a character and what's their problem. And so it could be something. One story that was a lot of fun to write was a young mum whose little boy will only eat food that's a particular colour. And each week the food, it's a different colour. So one week he'll only eat green food, the next week he'll only eat red food, for example. And sort of thinking, well, how does she resolve this? So I enjoyed sort of that thinking through of it, and how do you sort of keep the reader guessing for how this is going to be resolved?
That also, I'm guessing, maybe that confidence builds that for writers starting out, I'm not sure the idea of it being fun, that I have no idea how I'm going to resolve this, could equate to fun. But actually, when you've done it a few times, maybe that's part of the fun, that it hasn't come yet.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I suppose there were some times where I thought, well, I fixed it before, I'll get the answer somewhere. There have been times sort of with the novel writing where the characters have got themselves in an absolute pickle. And I've just gathered them together and said, you got yourselves into this. I do not know how to get you out. You have got to come up with something. And then I need to take myself out of it. And I do this with the short stories as well, as I don't know how to fix this. So I'm really keen on gardening, and I like walking, and I like exploring old buildings, and I do lots of handicrafts. And there's something very repetitive and meditative about all of these hobbies. It just sort of creates a bit of space where the character's voice can sort of come in and say, oh, well, I could do this, or what if this happened? And just it starts to just sort of emerge. So a potential solution that then I can start playing with.
We were talking about the different experiences of short stories and novels. And I love that example of how for a short story, it's a character in search of a circumstance, of a plot. And with a novel, it's a plot in search of characters. It's really lovely the way that you clearly know that that is your process. Are there any habits that work for you in terms of either starting the writing, making sure the writing finishes, coming back from the garden, knowing what's actually good time off and what is procrastination? What's been good for you, writing habits wise?
I'm giggling because there have been times when I've been out and just suddenly had a flash of inspiration. So, I know how to fix it. And so I'll ring my home telephone number to leave a voicemail message. But I can't just leave the voicemail message. I have to make it dramatic. And so I don't know if you remember The Men from U.N.C.L.E. So the message always starts open channel D. And then I just say whatever. There is absolutely no reason to say open channel D, except I find it amusing.
There is a reason, though, because it's your ritual. It is what brings forth the situation. Yeah. Oh, that's fabulous.
The way I go about it with novels is I do lots of exploring the character. I'll sort of draw maps of the place. I'll draw out character connections. So I have a technique where I draw out all the character connections, see how it's a way of checking that I've got enough plot and I've got enough story is by drawing out the characters and drawing all the different links between them. And I can see where there's a soggy bit. And then I think, right. And I don't start writing until I know that I have got enough in the middle, because that 30,000 word bit where you suddenly go, right, I know how this ends, but what actually happens in the middle, I'm not really sure. So I've got a technique for dealing with that. And then what I do after I've played with it for quite some time and procrastinated hugely by putting together a mood board with cutting pictures out of magazines and gluing them onto a bit of paper.
Can I press you on that? Is that procrastination, or is that process?
It's part of the process, but it is also a bit of procrastination, because by that point I can usually feel the story starting to push. When it starts to push, it's going, okay, I want to start being written now. And it's really scary. And another part of the process is that when I start writing, when it's also kind of new and shiny, that it's in my head, and I know that as soon as it comes out onto the page, it will no longer be new and shiny. It will be really quite awful. And that's quite a terrifying prospect. So I write first thing in the morning, still in my pajamas. And usually once I'm into it, I switch the TV news off. But when I start writing, I leave the TV news on. And I say to myself, I am not writing. I'm listening to the news, but I also happen to be faffing about on my laptop. And that's how I get into it.
That's such a powerful way, isn't it? That it doesn't count. It doesn't count. It doesn't count. Oh, I'm already there. Rather than do I have time, which is when people don't do it. Yeah. It's a beautiful example. So we met originally when you came to one of my workshops, and you've now been a member of the Writers' Gym for a good long while, which is an enormous pleasure. In terms of how writing coaching has added to this for you, what's been valuable? What's been interesting?
There's been so many different aspects to it that I found, I think, surprising at first. And the first thing was just that finding my tribe. The writing sessions where we're sitting there all working on our own different projects, but it creates a safe place to sit and write, and knowing that other people are sitting and writing too. And that great sense of camaraderie in the group, that we're all cheering each other on. And it's a safe place to say, I'm really struggling, but also it's a safe place to say, hey, I've had a big win, because it's not always safe to say that. And you could say that to people and they don't actually understand what the big deal is. Oh, hey, I've had a story accepted. Oh, well, so what? You're supposed to be a writer, but actually every win is a win. And in terms of sort of the coaching, it's that safe space where you can sort of bring along whatever's happening at the time. And as a writer, other stuff that's happening in your life kind of impinges or has an effect on your writing, because it affects your mood and it affects how you feel about yourself. And all of these things change the way that you turn up at the page. So a lot of the writing coaching experience has been about learning to sort of look at my own rhetoric. What is getting in my way? How am I standing in my own way? Sort of challenging ideas that I have about myself as a writer. One of the big differences I've seen in myself is that instead of saying that couldn't be me because, I'm starting to say, well, that could be me, and well, let's just give it a go. That feels very exciting, and it feels much more expansive. That sort of there are opportunities out there. And it takes a little bit of courage to put your hand up and say, well, I would like to play over here and I would like to be considered for this. But actually, the fear of the fear, if that makes sense, is greater than the actual fear involved with pressing send. That once you've just go, no, I'm just going to do it. The fear in pressing send is a lot less than but what if they're going to, and there's sort of total tailspin you get yourself into.
Whereas, as we've talked more and more in that expansive manner, as you say, you've seen those examples of how I'm not the sort of person or I'm not the kind of person who becomes either I would like to do, or I wonder what it's like to, or a genuine I'm not interested, but it's no longer that mess of what does this say about me? It's going for the who am I and what do I choose? And expansive is a very good way of looking at that, isn't it? That we're always growing, and our creative mindset means that we are always looking for what is coming next and what we want, where we want to go with these things.
Yeah, exactly. Just seeing that the world is full of possibilities. There's a couple of funny things with writing. And one is that I'm still coming to terms with this from time to time, is that there's never a point where you're sorted, or as the Australians would say, there's never a point where you're home and hosed. And I used to sort of think, once I've got one book published, I'll be sorted. Once I've got an agent, I'll be sorted. Once I've got a publisher, I'll be sorted. And this is just not true. And that can be terrifying, but it can also be really liberating. The other thing that I've learned is that it's not over till it's over. So sometimes when sort of people have said to me, I sent off a story to a competition or I sent it to a magazine and they didn't want it, I said, well, send it somewhere else. Because I do believe that stories find their level. And I've had occasions where I've sent a story to a magazine and it's been rejected. So I sent it to another magazine who accepted it straight away and paid me double what I would have got from the first magazine. So a rejection can be a really positive thing, but you have to allow it to be a positive thing.
I was talking about this in response to a big rejection that I got last week, in which it became really apparent that the thing it's not even secretly, but kind of secretly wanted to do, which was find the right agent for this and go down a more commercial route, is what this other publisher is suggesting I do. So it's a wonderful thing that they agree with what I actually realise I want. If there were a big red button in front of me where I could go, can we just have this sorted now? Just press the button and it be sorted. Of course I'm going to want to press the button, but actually, as you have repeatedly found, there's often something not just shinier, but more relevant around the next corner.
I mean, rejection is hard. Sometimes people say to me, how do you deal with rejection? And I'm very, very grown up about it. And what I do is I throw the manuscript on the floor and I jump up and down on it. And that is a technique that I learnt when I was at university and I got a mark.
Dyspraxics don't do that, we'll fall over.
So when I was at university, if I wrote an essay and the mark I got I didn't think was high enough, or there was a comment on it that I disagreed with, I would just throw it on the floor and jump up and down on it. And it's a technique that works for me, and I still do it.
Well, it's very somatic, isn't it?
Yeah, it just releases all of that.
Yeah.
And then you realise, for God's sake, woman, what are you doing? You're jumping up and down on a piece of paper. And it just releases it, and it forces you to acknowledge that you're upset. And then once you've acknowledged your feelings, then you can examine them. You can give them space to be your feelings rather than being squashed back down and sort of, well, you always know that you're going to be rejected and these are the things that happen, blah, blah, blah. And that's all sensible voice. And actually what you need is I'm hurt voice for a little while. And I'm hurt voice doesn't last for nearly so long if you've jumped up and down on the offending article.
That's such a great visual example, because the ways that people think rituals need to go, which can involve harm to the self, be it through alcohol or whatever, that, this is the ritual we're supposed to go through. Actually, the personal rituals, the summoning rituals to accept the feeling or to bring the creativity in, are so damn personal when they work. And it's not about blaming yourself. It's not about punishing yourself. It's about utilizing yourself. And I truly love that as a visual. Like, I can see that beginning in studenthood and going, well, do you know what? This works, and bringing it forward. I'm not kidding. As a dyspraxic, I'm not going to do that with a physical copy, because I have a very strong suspicion that what would happen is I would fall over. But I do love it. I love it as an idea. Does it scare the cats?
They're always sort of very sniffy about me as a writer anyway. Sort of, it's, why are you occupying? Because I sit on the bed in my pajamas writing. And it's, so why are you still occupying the bed? This is my turn. Then they walk across the keyboard. Yeah, then they loll around on the keyboard. Then they're just not that helpful as assistants. I have this image in my head though, sort of, will I still be writing in my 80s? Will I still be jumping up and down on bits of paper? It's just occurred to me at one point in my future life, I might have to rock up to A&E with a fractured pelvis saying, I got a rejection.
Kim, I beg you to take that as a short story idea.
It's cool, isn't it?
I think that is my example of the day of anxiety and creativity. And even when it's not active anxiety, it's concern about the future. And the what ifs going down the anxiety route instead of the creativity route, as if there were a different thing. And that is a wonderful story. And actually, if I may say so, I take that as a really strong image of success, that if I am enjoying and getting furious and upset about my writing life that is important to me now, I would love to know that pattern is going to continue.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I can imagine that I will be like my mum and will have completely white hair by that point. But yeah, the thought that I'll still be able to jump up and down and we'll still be writing and we'll still be thinking of ideas and we'll still obviously think that I know better than any publisher. It's just really appealing.
That is a strain that I think we all need to keep tuned, because there will be rejection, because we won't be suitable for everything, or just plain numbers mean that we don't get everything. But that sounds so damn healthy. You came to Substack relatively recently, and you and I have talked about this within sessions. Do you want to tell people a little bit about that?
I was looking for a platform where I could just write about what I was interested in, and just sort of to express some ideas about things that are happening to me, and also just to tell some fieldwork stories, frankly, because I lived in Australia in some very remote communities for 5 years altogether. And it was a very interesting experience. And I just wanted to sort of share some of those stories and then sort of reflect on writing life. And it's a bit of a commonplace book, really, in that it's just, what am I interested in at the moment? Okay, well, it's my Substack. I'll write about it. And
as well as Substack, another thing that is relatively new, or I don't know if new, but you've taken new steps with, is your career as a manuscript advisor and editor. And I mean, like me, you are an active poster girl for the Jigsaw career, that, we are writers, we have editorial or coaching or other hats going on. Yeah. It would be lovely to hear a little bit about how your writing life works, because writing is a big part, but it's not the only part. Do you want to talk about all of the other bits?
Yeah, well, so like many creative people, I do lots of bits. And I find that sort of for writing a novel or short stories, there are only so many hours in the day that I can have that level of creativity and just pure concentration on it, and that my brain needs something else to think about. And so I do some book coaching, typically with business owners who want to write a book as part of their marketing toolkit or to reach more clients than they could working one-to-one. And I started doing that a few years ago, and clients were saying, oh, well, I've written something, but I don't know if it's any good. Could you have a look at it? And so I started reading manuscripts and offering feedback. And this has sort of developed into offering my services as a developmental editor for nonfiction. And I love nonfiction because it's the structure of it. It's that analytical part of my brain that gets to look at a manuscript and say, okay, this is what it's trying to do. Is it achieving that? How is the structure supporting it? Where could it be strengthened? Where's it looking a bit thin in the argument? And how could that be addressed? Then, of course, there's the challenge of how do you express that in a way that the author thinks, I know exactly what she means. I do have some material and I can add that. So it feels like a very nurturing process, that there's two people almost with this newborn baby that is the manuscript, and there's the author and there's me saying, okay, so this is how we look after it and how we make it grow up big and strong.
And as ever, it's working so much from the objective of the client. You first need to know, as you say, what is this here to do? And then how can I help you narrow the gap between what's in your head and what's on the page?
Yeah, it's very interesting working with business owners because the creative blocks that they have seem to be quite different to the creative blocks that fiction writers have. So the fiction writers are quite often, it's sort of who am I to tell this story? Who am I to think of myself as a writer or an author? Whereas the business people can be sort of a much more straightforward in a way. It's sort of, well, how do I start? And what do I put in my introduction? And what are my options for publishing? And do I need an ISBN? And so it's all sort of nice kind of structural and practical issues and that we're looking at to work out, what's the best solution for them. And it makes a really nice contrast to the creative writing that I do sort of first thing.
It's a good reminder, isn't it, that different people's blocks are about different things. And if we can hear that they don't have our block, for example, but we can see what theirs is about, we can make that imaginative or that faith jump that if that is a dissolvable block, maybe mine is too, and on with the show.
Yeah, it's a good way of looking at it, actually. That sort of if you were a business person looking at yourself as the creative writer, that they would be saying, well, just write it.
A director I assisted many, many years ago told me that a director's job was to find 101 ways of saying no to an actor without ever saying the word no. That may be discourteous because the thing that I do, as you know, is I want to get in that person's head and help them get from where they are to where they need to be. And I truly believe he meant exactly the same thing in different words. But the thing is that it's finding the yeses. It's finding a point of curiosity or truth that you can work from, isn't it? And I have experienced that you are very good at finding that with people. You look at it and you see what it's trying to say, and you're very clear if you don't think it knows what it's trying to say yet.
It's just good fun. I mean, sort of ideally everybody would do work that they find fun and engaging, but I'm particularly lucky with the editing that I find the manuscripts absolutely fascinating, and the clients are all interesting people with lots of really useful and helpful things to say, and I get to help them say those things out in the world, which is a real privilege.
Brilliant. Do you want to say where the website is?
The website is very, very complicated because it's just drkimfleet.co.uk.
Wonderful. And we will put that in the notes in the podcast as well. Put that in the show notes.
I do have a story about meeting a fan once.
Oh, go for it. Yes,
I don't know if that's of interest. It kind of links into that sort of, just sort of listening to the podcast, there's been lots of writers who have kind of said, but it's just little old me. It's just me. And sort of you sort of push them on the awards that they've won and then the number of things that they've written. And there is still this sort of, but it's still just me.
Dan and his second BAFTA that didn't really count. Yes.
yeah, exactly. And I had an experience a few years ago. Paternoster had been published, and it's set at a very prestigious Cheltenham boarding school. And everyone has an idea about which school this is in real life, and it isn't any of them in real life. And I got an email from somebody who wrote to me and said, can you settle an argument between my wife and my mother? My mother says it's based at this school, and my wife says it's based at some other school. Which one is it? And I wrote back and said, well, it's not, but to let you into a little secret, this is where it is based, and this is how I've moved Cheltenham around a little bit in the story. And then my second book came out, Holy Blood, and I had a book launch for it. So I emailed this person and said, oh, you're very kind of very interested, and there's a book launch and it's free to come along. You don't have to buy the book, but it would be really nice to meet you if you'd like to come along. All three of them came, and they stood in the queue to sort of say hello to me. And they were nervous. And I had this feeling of, oh my God, these people are nervous, and it's just me. And it was a really strange feeling because I was nervous. It was my book launch. And there were people turning up who were going, oh yeah, we're going to meet this author whose book we like. But it was a great lesson in sort of remembering who the readers are and who you're writing for. And that you can be feeling quite scared inside, and it's just little old me, but to somebody else, actually, it's a big deal.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a great experience.
It's such an important thing, isn't it? Because everybody is looking at somebody else going, ooh. And in order to know that we're doing it about somebody else, we need to acknowledge that somebody might be doing that about us, and that's okay too, that we're all contributing. It's a really lovely thing. Thank you so much, Kim.
It's really lovely. Thank you, Rachel.
Dr. Kim Fleet, thank you for joining the Writers' Gym. You've visited the Writers' Gym with author and coach Dr. Rachel Knightley. Production and sound design are by Ashley Lexine, and theme music is by Chris Gregory.